Okay, next up on the Listen and Learn conversation right here of Taariq Florence, another one of the founding fathers of our brother to brother group on campus. Graduated from ONU in 2016,
Yeah.
got that master's, big, advancing himself, getting the master's MSA program here at ONU in accounting, 2017, originally from Fort Lauderdale, Florida. I just really appreciate you coming in and talk about some things today, Tariq, okay?
Yep. I'm glad to be here. Glad to be here. This is great what you're doing.
Awesome. Well, we're just trying to, just trying to keep some conversations going. It's been really encouraging to see some of the feedback. People that have sent emails, people that have stopped me in the streets here in Ada, people you wouldn't even think that has even seen this, and people
Oh,
are
that's
listening.
great.
People,
That's
people are
great. That's great. That's what you
people
need.
are listening. So we just got to keep pushing ahead, right? That's what
Right.
that's what
Exactly.
that's what polar bears do. So, anyways, why don't you kind of tell everybody kind of what you've been up to since you graduated back in 17?
So I graduated with my master's in 17. I started with a accounting firm here in Columbus, Ohio. I did that for about 3.5 years. I recently moved to another company nationwide. That's a big company here in Columbus, and I'm currently in their tax department. I also went back to school
Yeah.
to get a second master's. I'm currently getting my master's at Liberty University.
Realize
And
that, man. You're big
yeah,
time.
yeah, I'm also getting my second master's at Liberty University. That's in a master's of divinity with a concentration in biblical languages.
Awesome.
So
Good for you, man.
yeah,
That's
that's where
good.
I'm
That's
at now.
good stuff. Good for you. Well, and we've talked a little bit, and a lot of different things we can talk about here. But I think you kind of mentioned that you thought maybe a good place to start would be a little bit kind of on focus on systematic racism and just maybe
Right,
some examples of that, and just a little bit of history for everybody, that maybe some gaps that we have in some of our knowledge. So I
right.
think you could summarize some good things for us. So why don't you go ahead?
Right. So I think the when we start, I think we have to understand timelines. So the first slaves came here in 1619 in August. So in August, it'll be 401 years since the first slaves came here. So in 1619, their slaves are brought here and changed. And then there's about 250 years of slavery. And then the Emancipation Proclamation happens, and then slaves are freed. And then now there's about another 150 years or 110 about years of segregation and Jim Crow and further oppression. And then 1964 rolls around. Just for context, my dad was born in 1958. So there are people that are alive that were alive before the Civil Rights Act that happened. Um, the Civil Rights Act happened in 1964, and now Black people now have the ability to um, not be oppressed. But we
Right.
know that just because a law goes into effect, that doesn't necessarily mean that people follow that
Right.
law. And what ends up happening is you have systems like redlining. And what happens is redlining is banks had maps of their localities that surrounded them. And any areas that had a lot of Black people,
Mm-hmm.
those people weren't afforded loans for houses.
Mm-hmm.
So what ends up happening is those people don't get houses. They are not allowed to vote because they don't have. In that time, you needed a certain amount of capital behind your name to vote.
Right.
So now you're not allowed to vote because you don't have the capital, and then now you don't have the ability to build wealth for your family.
Right.
So what ends up happening is now you have a group of people that don't have the ability to build wealth. They don't have any property. They don't have any land.
Yep.
And then now you have a group of people that can do that
Right.
solely based upon not their qualifications, but the color of their skin.
Right.
Um,
And this, to me, this is like a perfect example of when people talk about white privilege. It's the extra obstacles that
right,
Black people have been put in front of them. And I think many times some white people, we get a little defensive, like hey, I didn't get privilege. I had to work hard for this, or my family had to work hard to get certain things, but they're not thinking because they don't see some of these
Hmm.
obstacles
Right.
that redlining, for example, has created. And you and I talked a little bit further about redlining, how that also then leads into school districts,
Right.
you know,
Exactly.
and how that just continues to build and, you know, just create extra obstacles, additional
Right.
obstacles.
Right. Because schools are funded based on their local property taxes. If you have a white affluent neighborhood and they have higher property taxes, schools receive more funding. If you have a school where there's not a lot of property taxes, the property value is lower, those schools uh, aren't funded as well.
Right.
And now you run into issues with kids don't have extracurricular activities,
Yeah.
maybe their football, their basketball, their band, those things are underfunded, and now they get into trouble.
And even the infrastructure too. I mean, I've been in enough schools over the years that some of the facilities cannot are then also affected, which is not a good learning environment, and just whether it's in the classroom or the extracurricular opportunities. So
I
I
agree.
think
I
that's
agree.
a great point. So I appreciate you bringing that up. Let's talk a little bit about the Confederate flag too. You know,
Okay.
you've spent time in the South, obviously growing up in Florida, and you've been up here for, you know, I guess what, about seven, you know, almost going on 8 years
Yeah.
now. And you know, you've seen some different parts of the country, and you know, you've been in this, you know, a pretty populated area in South Florida and Fort Lauderdale, and then been in
Hmm.
Ada for a few years. Definitely, you know, not populated, and then now in you know, Central Ohio. But I want you to talk a little bit about kind of the Confederate flag, and I think you have some really good, you know, kind of points we talked about.
So this movement that we see now of people wanting to remove the Confederate flag is an undoing of a movement that started right after the Civil War. It was this movement called the Lost Cause movement, and it was basically this push to rewrite history, and to give Southern the Southern population a pride about the Confederacy, even though they had lost the Civil War.
Right.
So what historians like Edward A. Pollard had done is they had rewrote history books, and the three tenets of the Lost Cause movement was to glorify Confederate soldiers that had died. It was to make slavery seem like it was a benevolent system, like it was a good thing. And it was to, the third point was to make slavery, um, make slavery, it was to rewrite history so that slavery wasn't a key point or a key focal point in what started
Mhm.
the Civil War. And
Right.
then that movement was picked up by this group called the United Daughters of the Confederacy. And they picked this movement up, and they lobbied, they raised money, they lobbied for politicians. And what ended up happening is that these monuments of Confederate leaders, a lot of the monuments that you see scattered all across southern states today, have been raised or erected because of the United Daughters of the Confederacy. So
Yeah.
this was an entire movement dedicated to perpetuating racist ideals. They
Right.
even had another group called the Children of the Confederacy, which was kind of like a YMCA,
Right.
and students would come in and they would get points for um, reciting, Confederate ideals, and memorizing generals' names, and having just establishing a pride in
So
in
just
those in
feeding
those
that propaganda, they're feeding, you know, they're feeding this into those young people, and then they
exactly.
can't help but probably kind of fall into this. And let me ask this: I was talking with somebody else recently, young man who was talking about how, you know, he didn't really see the flag that much where he grew up,
Hmm.
and then where he was in college. It wasn't here, but it was someplace similar to ONU. You wouldn't see it around campus, but sometimes if he left, he was driving somewhere outside of the campus, every now and then he would see the flag.
Hmm.
And you know, what is it like? What does it feel like when you see something like
For me, it there are people who that flag, though it may not mean that to those people that fly it today, but the people that originally flew that flag believed in something.
Yeah.
And I don't think you can separate that flag from what those original people believed in.
Right.
It's like separate. It's like trying to separate the Nazi flag from Nazi Germany.
Right.
Like that flag means something when Jews
Yeah.
see it.
Yeah.
So it means something to Black people. It's more harmful than anything else when Black people see that flag
Yeah.
and when they look at it.
And I think you made a great point. Someone may not really even understand that has the flag. But if
Hmm.
they listen and if they really, I think this goes back to putting yourself in someone else's shoes. And if you
Agreed.
really do put yourself in your shoes and understand how you view that and why you view that and what historically it's been proven that there's evidence to show that that's what it meant, that's something that probably it would be really helpful for some of those people that maybe don't have those clear, direct intentions just to understand.
I agree. I agree.
Well, good man. That's some powerful stuff. Some very educational. There's some really good information you covered there. So I appreciate it. We could go on for a while, but I think
Yeah. Yeah.
it was really impactful, and you articulated it very well. So I really thank you for that. We're very proud of you. Just really excited to see you keep doing your thing, and
Appreciate that, Coach.
it's nice to have you in Ohio. And I know, who knows where the future is. You're gonna have a lot of opportunities. You're an intelligent young man who's doing well in his profession. So wherever you end up, we hope you continue to stay in touch with us. Okay, bud?
Of course, Coach. Thanks for having me. I appreciate you doing this. This is great.
You got it, man. I appreciate you. Go
All right,
Bears.
go Bears.